Breaking tonight, a stunning allegation. The Prime Minister accuses India of being behind the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil.
Today I'm rising to inform the House of an extremely serious matter.
The shooting of a Sikh leader in BC, now a matter of national security. A top Indian diplomat expelled. The reaction and where this could go from here. Also tonight, Canada's top grocery executives summoned to Ottawa.
Will you lower food prices?
Will you lower this? But will this actually change anything about high food prices? And under pressure to fix the cost of living crisis, Justin Trudeau goes one-on-one on the breakdown.
How would you respond to the criticism that your government, in the 8 years that it's been in power, has done very little to bring more homes to market in this country?
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Reaction is pouring in tonight to that breaking news. The Prime Minister accusing India of orchestrating the killing of a Canadian citizen here in this country. In today's stunning announcement, Trudeau cited credible intelligence linking India's government to the fatal shooting of Hardeep Singh Nijar, a prominent Canadian Sikh leader outside a Sikh temple in Surrey, BC in June. This accusation threatens to shake Canada's already fragile relationship with a rising superpower. Our team is tracking reaction to all of this as it unfolds tonight. Salima Shivji is in our Mumbai bureau. Lindsay Duncombe is in Surrey. But we begin with Evan Dyer in Ottawa and that shocking accusation.
The day Parliament returned, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau rose to speak to all Canadians about an extremely serious matter.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijar.
If these allegations are true, they represent an outrageous affront to Canada's sovereignty.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, himself a Sikh, also expressed outrage over the allegations.
We need to know the truth. We need to know all potential links, and anyone and everyone responsible should be brought to justice.
Canada's foreign minister said the Indian government had crossed a red line.
I've conveyed these principles to my Indian counterparts, and I've also told him that we expect India's full collaboration to make sure that we get to the bottom of this.
Hardeep Singh Nijar was a Sikh leader in BC and a supporter of the movement for an independent Khalistan, a Sikh state carved out of India's Punjab. India considered him a terrorist. Nijar was shot dead by 2 gunmen outside his Surrey temple back in June. When Trudeau met India's Narendra Modi 8 days ago in New Delhi, he told him directly that Canada considered India to be behind the killing. But the Trudeau government didn't go public.
Mr. Trudeau, there is a reason that we are having bilateral meetings with everybody else and not with you.
That exchange created a hostile environment for the Canadian delegation that was made worse when a technical fault on the Canadian plane forced Trudeau to extend his stay for 2 days. One Canadian didn't wait for the plane. National Security Advisor Jody Thomas headed straight to the UK to start advising allies in person that a major diplomatic storm was coming and Canada would be asking for their support.
And Evan, Canada has also now expelled a top Indian diplomat.
Yep, that's right, Adrian. His name is Pavan Kumar Rai, and he's accused of being the head of India's intelligence network in Canada.
So what's your sense of how far this could actually go?
Well, Adrian, India will now have to either accept or reject this allegation, and it seems very unlikely that they'll own up to it. So I think we should at least expect a tit-for-tat expulsion by India of a Canadian diplomat, but it may very well not end there. And so Canada's been reaching out to its allies, with the Prime Minister speaking personally to U.S. President Joe Biden, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and French President Emmanuel Macron to ensure Canada has their support.
All right, we'll be watching. Thanks, Evan Dyer in Ottawa.
Thanks, Adrian.
As you can imagine, these allegations are reverberating across the country, but they hit closest to home for Hardeep Singh Nijar's family. Tonight, just steps away from where that shooting took place, his son reacted to tonight's developments.
It was just a matter of time for when the truth would come out. So when we heard that news today, it was a sense of relief that, it's finally coming to the public eyes that, the Indian government is involved.
He spoke as people gathered at the Gurdwara to remember his father, as they do on the 18th of every month, the day Hardeep Singh Nijar was killed in June. His death hit many in Surrey, BC hard. Lindsay Duncombe shows us how people there are taking the news.
The people who worshipped with Hardeep Singh Nijar had been shouting accusations India was responsible for his death for months now. The Prime Minister's announcement didn't spark celebration here.
Until we actually see people behind bars, until we see actually people that were, supplying, money for this hit, carrying this out, I think it's kind of like skepticism right now that as if something's actually going to happen.
Canada knew that this was all happening and didn't intervene as per their fiduciary duty. It takes our leader to be killed for a morsel of acknowledgement.
The man India labeled a terrorist was known at his Gurdwara as an activist, leading the fight for a free Sikh state. Nijar's death, the latest violent chapter in the long-standing and divisive fight for Khalistan, a fight this former BC Premier says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has picked a side in.
There's a perception that Mr. Trudeau has been politically in bed with the Khalistani elements for his own political reasons. Not the violent elements, but the separatist elements.
And there was praise for the Prime Minister.
Finally, somebody to stand with Sikhs, right? And we appreciate the way what he did, right? What he said, right?
Current Premier David Eby says he was deeply disturbed and angered, adding Canadians across the country must be safe from the interference of foreign governments, including being targeted for threats or physical harm, including murder. These activists say Nijar's death sparked fear.
It was just a deep scarring moment, I think, for the Sikh community in Canada, and also for the generation of activists that's still coming, that the reality of what we're speaking out about may lead to our death even in this country.
Sikh separatists say Canada's move today will intensify, give energy to their global fight, one that is expected to continue with rallies and town halls here in British Columbia later this month. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Surrey.
So it's now Tuesday morning in India. People there are waking up to this news. Let's bring in Salima Shivji, our South Asia correspondent in Mumbai. So Salima, India's government has now responded.
They absolutely have, with a strongly worded statement, Adrian. The reaction very blunt from India's External Affairs Ministry. They're saying that they have seen and categorically reject Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statement. The statement actually confirms that those similar allegations about what Canada's Prime Minister calls credible intelligence were made by Trudeau in that G20 meeting on the sidelines, a very brief chat that Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had on the sidelines of the G20, a tense meeting by all accounts. But I want to delve a little bit deeper into what this statement actually says. In it, India's External Affairs Ministry actually says allegations of the government of India's involvement in any act of violence in Canada are absurd and motivated. The statement continues to say, we are a democratic polity with a strong commitment to the rule of law. The statement also goes on to blast Canadian officials for sheltering and not addressing what the Indian government calls Khalistani extremists and terrorists in Canada, bluntly saying that India is very concerned that Canadian political figures have expressed what they see as sympathy for such elements. And it does go on to say that the Indian government rejects any attempts to connect the government of India to such developments. So as expected, a very stark and strongly worded reaction from India on this. But the question really does remain, what else will come after this? What more will come? What sort of diplomatic retaliation India may opt for after Canada has expelled that Indian diplomat Pavan Kumar Rai? So that remains to be seen. But what is absolutely clear, and this statement makes even more clear, is that the bilateral relationship with Canada and India is in a very bad place right now. Adrian.
All right, Salima Shivji joining us from the CBC News Bureau in Mumbai. Just a little bit later, a former CSIS intelligence analyst gives us more insight into today's explosive developments and how they may fit into a pattern of foreign interference allegations. So all that news came on what was already a busy day in Ottawa, the return of Parliament, with Canada's housing and food affordability crises high on the agenda. So there was a flurry of activity on Parliament Hill, with the opposition accusing the government of not doing enough to help people who are struggling, and the government leveling much the same accusation at grocery chain CEOs. The Liberals are under pressure to find a fix, and the pressure isn't only from their political opponents. As Rafi Boudjikanian explains, Liberals are sliding in the polls, and that is adding urgency to everything.
MPs are back on Parliament Hill, where the housing crisis is just one of the issues that has Justin Trudeau on the defense.
His inflationary deficits drive up interest rates, which make it harder for builders to finance their construction and harder for Canadians to afford a mortgage. So what will he finally do what he promised to do 8 years ago, and that is balance the budget to bring down interest rates and inflation?
Focus on delivering real results, while the leader opposite is focused on empty slogans and picking fights.
With a common-sense Conservative government.
Over the summer, the Liberals fell in opinion polls while the Conservatives surged, as Pierre Poilievre hammered Trudeau on rising mortgages and the cost of living. In an interview with CBC's Front Burner, Trudeau acknowledged people are frustrated with his government's handling of the housing issue.
I'd always say we could have moved faster. Absolutely, there's always more to do. So the question that people will ask politically over the coming years is, which government or which potential government has the solutions to this really big problem?
To tackle affordability, Trudeau recently announced a plan to waive the GST for construction of new rental units. Monday, his government also vowed to hold a vote on a National Pharmacare Act by Christmas. That's a long-time ask of the NDP, who are vowing to force the legislation to pass.
We have heard the Liberals in the past say they can't meet deadlines. I mean, they're always looking for excuses to get out of things.
The NDP's agreement to support the Liberals on key votes is still in place until 2025, which could give Trudeau and his party time to turn their electoral fortunes around. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Housing is one issue. The price of groceries is another. And on that front today, the industry minister met with the heads of Canada's top grocery chains for what he called a difficult but much needed conversation. Ashley Burke with what came of it.
Will you lower food prices? Will you lower food prices?
Right now?
It's an image the government wants the public to see.
Will you lower food prices? Will you lower food prices?
The CEOs of Canada's 5 biggest grocery chains called to an urgent meeting in Ottawa.
We're hoping for a productive meeting. Thank you.
How do you feel about being here? After sinking to new lows in the polls, the Liberals are trying to win back support.
Our government is going to do everything in our power to make sure prices stabilize.
To do that, the Prime Minister told Front Burner's Jamie Poisson he wants CEOs to deliver a plan.
Do you want them to tell you that they're going to bring grocery prices down, or do you want them to just stabilize prices?
I think stabilizing is the first good thing, but seeing prices come down would be even better.
How did the meeting go?
Very productive meeting.
When CEOs emerged from the almost 2-hour meeting, some dodged the cameras.
The Prime Minister said the prices need to come down, will they?
Others defended themselves.
Profit margins are not going up, they're going down on the food side. So we're not profiting from inflation.
Everyone in there wants the same thing, which is for Canadians to have better food pricing and for that to cool down, and it will.
The industry minister who met with them says he's leaving with a commitment.
Bottom line is that they agreed to work with the government to stabilize food prices in Canada.
Right now, the food inflation rate is not manageable for Canadians at 8%. It's just too high.
The opposition says this is just political theater.
I'm concerned that they're just talking again. And it's been 20 months since the cost of food inflation, has outpaced general inflation.
Their response to all this is to hold a big photo op today. The Prime Minister claims food will be affordable by Thanksgiving. So, will, by Thanksgiving, lettuce be back down from its 94% increase because of today's meeting.
So, Ashley, what does this ultimately mean for food prices?
Well, Adrian, don't expect the price of a carton of milk to drop by $2 tomorrow. The industry minister's office says that they can't reverse food prices, but says what they can do is try and slow down the rate of inflation on food so that prices don't go up as fast. Now, these CEOs have until Thanksgiving to come up with their own plans, or else the government is threatening they could impose punitive taxes.
All right, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. In her interview, Jamie Poisson also asked the Prime Minister whether he's worried about the competition he faces from Pierre Poilievre. His answer and much more of their conversation is ahead on The Breakdown. Now, across the country today, protesters demanded that a Winnipeg landfill be searched for the remains of 2 murdered Indigenous women. Cameron McIntosh now on the rallies and whether they might move the government to act.
For 9 months now, Donna Bartlett has been trying to speak to anyone who will listen.
Go dig that landfill.
She's the grandmother of Mercedes Myron, whose remains, along with those of Morgan Harris, are believed buried in this Winnipeg area landfill, believed to be victims of an accused serial killer.
Search the landfill and quit making excuses.
So here, along with about 150 other demonstrators, she's calling out the Manitoba government for refusing to support a search on what is being called an International Day of Action.
If your granddaughter or your daughter was sitting in a landfill and nobody wanted to look for her, what would you do? You'd be crying and fighting.
One of several demonstrations across the country, bodies in landfills symbolizing a feeling of disrespect across Indigenous communities, as some called for landfill searches for other missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Until more settlers stand up and speak up, not on our behalf, but speak up with us and stand with us, nothing's going to change.
While many say Manitoba's search should be done in the spirit of reconciliation, it's also fraught with politics. Earlier this year, a feasibility study said a search could take 3 years and cost over $180 million. Manitoba refused, citing safety concerns.
I stand by the decision that has been made.
Campaigning today, Premier Heather Stephenson said she's focusing on preventing violence.
I will continue to work with the community to ensure that we prevent this from happening again.
In a statement today, Ottawa called on Manitoba to reverse course, but isn't promising to help fund a search either. Outside a meeting with the federal minister, Manitoba's Grand Chief expressed frustration.
We came here with broken hearts, and it's unfortunate that we have to leave here with broken hearts.
With that, Indigenous leaders say they'll keep pushing, hoping to make this a defining issue in Manitoba's upcoming provincial election. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A Calgary pastor won't spend any more time in jail for his role in blocking Alberta's main Canada-U.S. border crossing early last year. Artur Pawlowski was sentenced to 60 days in jail today, but a judge gave him credit for time already served. Back in May, he was found guilty of mischief and breaching a release order for his role in the Coutts border blockade. The judge found Pawlowski intended to incite people to continue their protest against COVID-19 public health measures. Ontario's Superior Court has ruled that Canada's laws on sex work are constitutional. It rejected a charter challenge by an alliance fighting for sex workers' rights.
This fight is not over. We likely will appeal this decision.
The alliance argued unsuccessfully that the current law's heightened stigma may make sex work more dangerous. 5 American citizens are free tonight after a high-stakes prisoner swap between the U.S. and Iran.
It's very good to be able to say that our fellow citizens are free.
The complex diplomatic deal that won their freedom. Next. Plus, we return to the stunning allegation from this country against the government of India.
I think it's very clear that states think that they can operate with absolute impunity in Canada.
A former CSIS intelligence analyst helps us break down how we got to this point. And a historic day for women's hockey.
Minnesota selects Taylor Heisey.
The inaugural draft of the new Women's League. We're back in 2 minutes. A bus crash has killed at least 24 people in Peru. The bus was driving at night in the Andes Mountains when it plunged into a ravine. Some survivors were freed from the wreckage and taken to hospital. And British police now say they have received a report of an alleged sexual assault in 2003 in the wake of accusations against comedian Russel Brand. Those allegations from multiple women were reported by multiple UK news outlets. Brand denies them. Promoters have postponed a string of his live gigs. 5 Americans imprisoned for years in Iran are finally on their way home tonight after a high-stakes prisoner swap. Katie Simpson now on the politics and the billions of dollars that got the deal done.
The first steps outside of Iran, first sighs of relief and hugs.
all long awaited after being unjustly detained for years in a notorious Iranian prison. These Americans clearly so eager to rebuild their lives.
It's very good to be able to say that our fellow citizens are free after enduring something that I think it would be difficult for any of us to imagine.
In exchange for the 5 Americans, including 2 asking to remain anonymous, the U.S. freed 5 Iranian nationals and gave Tehran access to $6 billion in oil revenues that had been frozen by U.S. sanctions.
The funds were moved to another bank where we have absolute oversight of how they're used, and they can only be used for humanitarian purposes.
But last week, Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, told NBC News something different.
Naturally, we will decide, the Islamic Republic of Iran will decide to spend it wherever we need it.
Republicans are slamming the swap and the fact that Raisi is attending the UN General Assembly in New York.
When I'm president, I won't give criminals like Raisi a visa to allow them to set foot on American soil, and we will never, ever pay ransom to terrorists or terrorist states.
The deal comes as Iran continues its brutal crackdown on protesters demanding change in the wake of Mahsa Amini's killing, and frustrations over Tehran's recent ban on international nuclear inspectors.
We have to be there. We have to, and we will not stop our activities there.
Washington insists this will not be a reset of the relationship, pleading with Americans to stay away from dangerous places like Iran. Katie Simpson, CBC News, London, Ontario.
Well, the future was on full display today as a new professional women's hockey league held its first draft.
I wrote down what I did, the days I did it, just to make sure that I remember this for the rest of my life.
How dreams became a reality for some lucky young players. Plus, bombshell accusations against the Indian government.
To tie those actions to a murder or a targeted assassination in Canada is, I would argue, unprecedented.
How we got here and what could happen next. And tough questions for a prime minister under fire.
Why wasn't there a plan to ensure that this influx of people matched our housing needs better?
The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next.
You can always find The National, our award-winning CBC News journalism and breaking news anytime, on the free CBC News app, cbcnews.ca, on CBC Gem, and on our YouTube channel.
Tonight, 90 hockey players are getting used to their new teams in a new league. The Professional Women's Hockey League held its inaugural draft today. Jamie Strachan was there.
Minnesota selects Taylor Heisey.
And with that, Taylor Heisey took her place in hockey history, the first pick in the inaugural PWHL draft.
I think just, I try to take in every moment. I wrote down what I did, the days I did it, just to make sure that I remember this for the rest of my life.
A new beginning for a sport that's been fighting for a sustainable women's professional league for years.
I didn't think it would in my time, and I'm super lucky that I'm able to be here, and such an iconic moment for women's hockey.
This draft was about the league's future, but also the game's future.
What team do you play for? Whitby Wolves!
For these young fans, a chance to see their heroes up close.
It's just so fun, and it's such an inspiration seeing all these other people and other women.
Also in the crowd, Canadian legends who paved the way, celebrating a moment they never thought would come.
It's a former player and somebody who has had a vision with a lot of, former teammates, and this is exactly the vision. And so honestly, it's a dream come true.
This is where it really starts to get going.
The PWHL will launch in January. The 6 teams, including Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, still don't have names. Where people can watch the games or where teams will play also still isn't known.
Here's a centering pass, and what a save!
But unlike previous leagues, there's a feeling this time is different. There's big money behind it, and big names, like tennis legend Billie Jean King, who was in Toronto for the draft.
This is an incredible moment. But it's not about a single moment. It's about a movement. finally giving women professional hockey players the structure, the support, and the platform they deserve.
An important first step for a league that says there will be many more moments to celebrate. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Now here's where we break down the news shaping our world. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau takes hard questions on the public anger driving him down in the polls. But first, explosive allegations link India's government to an assassination in Canada.
The killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
In June, Hardeep Singh Nijar was shot dead in BC. India had branded him a terrorist. CSIS had warned he could be a target. Now, a former CSIS intelligence analyst is standing by with her thoughts on what's been happening behind the scenes. But first, Ella Morrow breaks down what we know about the killing.
Hardeep Singh Nijar was killed in June, shot by 2 masked gunmen outside this temple in Surrey, BC, where he was president. The police said Nijar was targeted, and right away, some community members pointed the finger at India.
This hit, this assassination, needs to be investigated thoroughly. We have, once again, strong suspicions that this is foreign interference in Canada.
Nijar was a prominent Sikh leader, a loud voice pushing for the creation of a separate Sikh nation called Khalistan in India's Punjab state. Supporters of Nijar and the Khalistan movement across Canada and in other cities around the world protested his killing.
He really championed the cause of human rights, and he really had a great contribution to the society.
He stood up as a loud voice, as a beacon of courage.
But to the Indian government, Nijar was a terrorist, alleging he was involved in a 2007 bombing in Punjab, which Nijar denied. The World Sikh Organization released a statement accusing India of being a terrorist state. It has brazenly engaged in extrajudicial killings. There are other Sikhs in Canada who face an ongoing threat to their lives. Every possible measure must be taken to ensure their safety.
1984.
The fight for the creation of Khalistan was at its height in the 1980s. Violence between Sikh separatists and the Indian government rocked Punjab state, killing thousands. With Nijar's killing and India accused of carrying it out on Canadian soil, those long simmering tensions are again inflamed.
A lot of questions remain here about what happened and what happens now. So to help us break it down is Jessica Davis, a former CSIS intelligence analyst. She's in Ottawa. So Jessica, can you walk us through what needed to happen between the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijar to the Prime Minister accusing a foreign country, in this case India, of helping to murder a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil?
The way that I see this and how this probably happened is that there was actually probably parallel investigations ongoing. So as soon as I saw who was murdered, it immediately sprang to mind that this could potentially have some element of foreign interference to it. Obviously, I'm not alone in that supposition. So what ended up happening is that there was likely a murder investigation ongoing by the RCMP into the actual events that happened in British Columbia. And at the same time, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, was likely also conducting a fact-finding investigation potentially into foreign interference, to basically figure out who might have ordered this targeted assassination.
Can you put some perspective on this for us? How unusual is this moment? How unusual was it to see the Prime Minister do what he did today?
It's extremely unusual for the Prime Minister to stand up in the House of Commons and say anything about foreign interference, let alone be so specific about what country we're talking about, and then to tie those actions to a murder or a targeted assassination in Canada is, I would argue, unprecedented. We do have a history of expelling diplomats who we think are conducting espionage activities, but that's often done quite quietly, mostly behind the scenes with a minimal press statement. So it's really quite an unusual day today.
And I guess that leads people to wonder, given that, what happens now? I mean, Canada just expelled the head of Indian intelligence in Canada. How does this country move forward with bilateral relations?
Expelling the head of Indian's foreign intelligence in Ottawa, so the research and analysis wing here, is what I would argue an extremely proportional step. So this is exactly what needs to happen in this kind of situation. India will try to get someone else in to fill that role. Foreign Affairs will make decisions about whether or not that person will be accredited to the High Commission. This is going to put a serious damper on things like trade, well, not necessarily trade, but things like technology transfers, sharing of information. Certainly the intelligence sharing relationship will be curtailed further than it already had been. So there's some serious repercussions for the Canada-India relationship.
One last thought. I'm just curious, from a security perspective, we hear Iranian dissidents, for example, tell us stories of being targeted here, afraid here, Saudi teams being apprehended at Canadian airports. What's the perception of Canada? Because they tell us they feel like Canada is perceived as a bit of a mark in that sense.
I think it's very clear that states think that they can operate with absolute impunity in Canada. A state's first move in foreign interference is not a targeted assassination. There's almost certainly been plenty of other foreign interference activities being conducted in Canada by India, likely targeting the Indian diaspora community. So there are people that we really need to be listening to at this point in time to understand the scope of that activity. But it's certainly been the case over the course of the last few years that many countries have been operating with relative impunity in Canada. We have been weak on foreign interference in this country. We've taken a few small steps to make ourselves more resilient against this threat, but we have a long way to go, as this particular incident demonstrates.
All right, Jessica Davis, thank you for breaking all this down for us.
Thank you very much.
Up next, just before making those allegations against India, Justin Trudeau defended his record on those basic needs that cost you more.
I guess the question I'd ask is, how much worse would it have been?
Jamie Poisson also asks about Pierre Poilievre's rise in the polls. Blunt questions for a prime minister who's losing the faith of young voters.
Do you think you could have or should have done more for them?
Justin Trudeau defends what he's done to get housing built.
Government is always going to wear what's going on.
And addresses the anger over basics that's fueling the rise of his top rival. In an interview just hours before he made those public allegations against the Indian government, the Prime Minister sat down with Jamie Poisson, the host of CBC's daily podcast Front Burner, and she got right to the point.
Your polling numbers are pretty bad right now. They're as bad as they've ever been for your government since you took power in 2015. But the group that I really want to talk to you about today is Gen Z millennials, and you are polling particularly bad with this group. And I wonder if you reflect on it, why you think this group is leaving you in very big numbers, because they came out to vote for you in 2015, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we worked with them 8 years ago to reverse a government that didn't do anything on climate change, that didn't believe in inclusive economic growth, kept with trickle down, give tax breaks to the wealthiest. We managed to turn that around significantly. And we're in a really good position when the pandemic hit. And then the past few years have been really, really hard, particularly on young people, where there is now a sense not just of the challenges of paying for groceries or paying for rent or anything, but the idea of home ownership, the idea of a really strong, exciting future seems further and further away now than it did just a few years ago. And that loss of hope and optimism is devastating for people's morale. Of course, they're gonna grumble at government, and they're gonna say that the world's going in the wrong direction, and we have to step up and make sure we're solving for that.
So I hear you talking about how things have gotten worse for young people in this country since the pandemic, which there's truth to that for sure. But for sure, things were not great before the pandemic too, right? Like you mentioned housing. I remember back in 2015 when you appointed yourself youth minister, remember like you were like the guy, right? Yep. You campaigned on affordable housing. That was such a big part of your thing back then. And since you took power in 2015, The benchmark housing prices have gone up 70% in this country. The average rent is now north of $2,000 a month. It's going up like $100 a month. How would you respond to the criticism that your government, in the 8 years that it's been in power, has done very little to bring more homes to market in this country?
I guess the question I'd ask is, how much worse would it have been if we hadn't put forward a national housing strategy in 2017 with $70 billion worth of investment that allowed for 2 million families to get into new homes? After 10 years of a Conservative government that did nothing on housing. I mean, everyone understands housing takes a long lead time to actually make a difference. And if we hadn't got the federal government back into the business of housing, then everything would be much worse right now. So we actually kept things, on a slightly better track than they are, but there is so much more to do, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Canada's immigration numbers have increased significantly on your watch, and I want to be clear, this is not a criticism of immigration. TD Bank just said those immigration numbers could cause the housing shortfall to increase by 500,000 units in 2 years. And so why wasn't there a plan to ensure that this influx of people matched our housing needs better? Like, why no plan?
Oh, that is part of what we've been doing as a plan to make sure that we're responding to shortages in the construction industry, that we're bringing in the right kinds of skilled trades as well. That is also something that has been shifting over the coming years. These are not things that can turn on a dime, unfortunately. Government moves extremely slowly in responding to things, but it is moving because you don't want a government lurching around everywhere and flipping back and forth. You want a plan that's going to steadily make things better in tangible ways over the coming year, over the coming years, over the coming decade. And that's where understanding and bringing in all the different factors from global shortages to supply chains to inflation and interest rates to purchasing power. These are the kinds of things that come into building a plan like that, including around immigration numbers.
Do you think you've moved too slow, though?
I always say we could have moved faster. Absolutely, there's always more to do.
So groceries have gone up 20% since 2020. That's a huge amount, 20% in 3 years. And today, the big grocery store CEOs are coming to Ottawa. You called them here. They got hauled here before, though. I watched those committees, the committee hearings, and they are pretty clear that they didn't do anything wrong here, that they're not price gouging, and that the price of food is a lot more complicated and nuanced, the war in Ukraine, climate change. And so what's the point of calling them here? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, for all their protestations, the fact is grocery stores, the largest chains, are making record profits at a time where Canadians can't pay for groceries. There is a disconnect there that they need to be directly accounting for. And what we've done is, when we called them here before a number of months ago, we said, bring forward plans, make a difference. We're not really seeing much in the way of that. This time we're saying, okay, now you're really going to do this, or else we are going to step up with things that will balance it out. There are real consequences now in a way that that I think government should be appropriately careful about intervening in market forces this way, but it's gotten so that that math that Canadians see, large grocery chains making record profits while people can't pay for groceries, something's got to give on that, and that's what we're doing.
So what's the consequence? What are you going to do if they don't come up with a plan that you don't like?
Listen, we hope not to get down that, but there are a number of things that we can look at, including tax measures, that can balance that out.
What would a plan that they put forward look like? Like, what kind of plan do you want from them? Do you want them to tell you that they're going to bring grocery prices down, or do you want them to just stabilize prices?
I think stabilizing is the first good thing, but seeing prices come down would be even better.
I want to talk to you before we go today a little bit about your main challenger, Pierre Poilievre, because they are now in majority win territory. But the young people, they're actually going to the Conservatives, right? Like right now, you're the third place party, but the Conservatives are the first place party.
In the House?
In the polls, sorry.
Well, so, I mean, first of all, how many of our young people are actually answering polls.
Well, I don't think David Coletto at Advocates Data is talking to landlines. I think he's talking to them.
There's all sorts of questions, but the reality is polls. We were lower in the polls than we are now. 2 months before the 2015 election that we won in a majority. We were lower in the polls now in 2019 before we won that election as well. Polls are going to go up and down in 2 years away from an election. If people are going to give more scrutiny to Per Poilievre right now and to the so-called solutions he's putting forward, I think that's good for democracy, and I think that is just fine. We have work to do, and we're focused on delivering for Canadians, and we're going to continue to over the next 2 years until the election.
Look, I've been to his leadership convention, and we've been to his rallies, and we've talked to a lot of his supporters, people that have driven across the country to see him, to see this guy. And I would say that the energy around him is not dissimilar to the energy around you in 2015. And so, does that keep you up at night? Are you worried?
I think Mr. Poilievre has been very, very clear that he sees a radically different future for the country than what we've been building around climate, around inclusive economic growth, around reconciliation, around evidence-based policy, around defending people's fundamental rights, than we have been working on as a government. And I'm confident that as Canadians look at the two very different visions for the kind of country we want to be, there are going to be some really important and exciting political discussions happening around kitchen tables, boardroom tables, dining room tables, and all that.
But what he's saying is clearly resonating. You mentioned anger before. People are angry.
Yes.
And does that, are you worried about him?
Of course, I'm worried anytime.
No, not about him. Are you worried about going up against him?
Yeah, no,
because it's certainly what he's doing seems to be working.
I am worried anytime Canadians are angry and pessimistic about the future, and not about politics. And I don't think talking down Canadians, talking down the economy, even if people are feeling down right now, is the solution to how we're going to meet and surpass the challenges that the world is throwing at every country around the world right now. Yeah, people are angry and worried, absolutely. But it's not enough just to reflect back that real anger to them and get up in the polls. People want us to solve those challenges, and they're not easy, as you've laid out, but we're doing it step by step, and that's the optimism that I know Canadians are always going to return to in the end.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thanks very much.
So Jamie Poisson had a lot more questions for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You can hear their full interview on Front Burner. Find it on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, coming up, a group of Indigenous dancers step on stage with pop music sensations.
Can you believe that you were just up there with ex-ambassadors?
No, but it'll sink in later.
Getting the chance to feel like superstars in our moment. So what are we looking at here? This is a group of Indigenous jingle dress dancers on stage with the band Ex-Ambassadors at a Thunder Bay, Ontario music festival. And so this jingle dress dance is a traditional Indigenous healing dance, and when these dancers saw the opportunity to share the stage with pop sensations, well, they stepped up, and tonight their performance makes our moment.
Give it up for our DFC jingle dress dancers.
I was wondering if the jingle dress dance girls would join you guys up for a song on stage.
Absolutely.
It was fantastic.
Oh my God, that was so much fun.
I was so nervous coming on stage.
They asked you to have the jingle dress dancers on the stage.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was so cool. I mean, it was really, really emotional also to see like people in the crowd reacting to it, and we're very honored.
Oh my God, it was really exciting and exhilarating. I like dancing in front of a crowd. I still feel the chills.
Can you believe that you were just up there with ex-ambassadors?
No, but it'll sink in later.
So much fun. So that Wake the Giant Music Festival in Thunder Bay is really sort of celebrating when First Nation students come to Thunder Bay to continue the studies and they leave their home communities. This is to sort of give everybody a lift to kick off the school year. From all of us here at the National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.